Yeah, I had what most people would call the perfect marriage. At least, that's what I believed. My wife, Anna, and I had been married for nearly 2 decades, coming up on 20 years in just a few weeks. And honestly, there wasn't much I would have changed about our life together. Sure, we had our occasional disagreements, but the making up afterward always made it worthwhile. That was just how we were. There had only been one truly rough patch in our marriage, and that was early on, our second year, to be exact. We'd gotten married young. Me at 20, Anna at 19. We were childhood sweethearts, having grown up just a few streets apart. My older brother, Mike, had married her sister, Olivia, the year before us, and following suit just felt natural. The issue? Mike and Olivia had their first baby within their first year of marriage, but for us, it just wasn't happening. We both got checked out, even though the doctors kept telling us to stop stressing and let nature take its course. But Anne's mother wouldn't let it go. Her family was big on having kids. She had 3 other sisters besides Olivia. So when Olivia and Mike's firstborn turned out to be another girl, her mom became even more desperate for a grandson in the family. The tests didn't tell us much. Anna was perfectly fine, and I had a slightly lower than average sperm count. Not anything major, according to the doctors. They reassured us that nothing was wrong and that we just needed to be patient. And in the end, they were right. A year later, Anna gave birth to our first child, Lisa. She was perfect in every way, just another beautiful baby girl. That moment put all our worries to rest. We knew we could have kids, and once we stopped stressing about it, everything felt easier. Not long after, Anna got pregnant again, and this time, she gave birth to our son, James. Finally, a boy. The whole family was over the moon. Not that the girls weren't loved just as much, but something about that first grandson seemed to make everything feel extra special. Of course, I was the first to gloat. I teased my brother Mike, bragging that I'd beaten him to the punch. He just smirked and told me to give it time. And sure enough, the following year, he and Olivia had their own son. Then, 8 months later, Anna and I welcomed another boy, whom we named David. It was like waiting for a bus. You think it'll never come, and then suddenly, 3 show up at once. Maybe because Anna and I had 2 siblings who married each other. We all lived more like one big family than separate households. Even as other sisters got married, they just blended into the mix. It was great for the kids, and no one ever had to struggle to find a babysitter. As far as I knew, all the couples were just as happy as Anna and I were, simply enjoying the simple joys of married life, surrounded by family. Of course, there were a few bumps along the way. Mike had a bad accident at work once, and I ended up donating blood for his transfusion. For a while, it felt like we were literally tied together, but he pulled through, and I didn't suffer for it. We always joked afterward that we were now real blood brothers. As our 20th anniversary approached, Anna and I started thinking about how to celebrate. Mike and Olivia had hit their milestone the year before, and we'd had such a great time that we decided to do something similar, a big gathering of friends and family in a private room at a local hotel. By then, Lisa, our daughter, had grown into a stunning young woman at 17. She was like a younger, even more striking version of her mother. Same dark brown hair, same huge green eyes that seemed to hold your attention the moment she looked your way. They were built the same, too, both slender, with long legs and a natural elegance that probably wasn't something a father should dwell on too much. Of course, she had a steady stream of boyfriends, and it felt like there was always some new guy coming or going. But she had a good head on her shoulders, so we let her navigate that part of her life without interfering too much. James, our son, at almost 16, took after me, broader, more solidly built. He was big into rugby, just like Mike and I had been at his age, and was already a key player on his school's first team. And then there was David, our youngest. He was going through a bit of a rough patch, not quite as athletic as James or as outgoing as Lisa. It wasn't anything serious, just regular teenage stuff. He was smart, probably even sharper than his siblings, but he struggled to find his place. Looking back, maybe I should have been more understanding that day. Maybe I should have just cleaned up the mess he left on the dining table instead of making a big deal about it. But I didn't. "You're not going anywhere until you clean up this mess," I told him firmly. "I'll do it later," he muttered, sulking. "No, you'll do it now," I insisted. "Why are you always picking on me?" he shot back, his voice rising with frustration. I'm not picking on you, I replied, my patience thinning. You're part of this family, and that means following the same rules as everyone else. And what if I'm not part of this family? He suddenly yelled, his face twisted in anger. I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What did you just say? My voice was low, controlled, but I could feel my hands clenching at my sides. David's face immediately changed. His anger disappeared, replaced by something else. Guilt? Maybe? Regret? Sorry, Dad, he mumbled quickly, his voice tight. I didn't mean that. I'll clean it up now. Without another word, he started gathering his books and clearing the table. A few minutes later, he was gone, slipping out of the room without a second glance. I stood there, staring at the empty table, my mind racing. He hadn't meant to say it, but he had said it. And suddenly, I couldn't shake the feeling that my whole world was about to come crashing down. I had always wondered why David was different. It wasn't just a passing thought. I had even brought it up with Anna before, but she would just shrug, smile, and tell me I was imagining things. Was I? Had I really just been overthinking it all these years? What had made David say that? If he had just yelled it in anger and stormed off, I would have been mad for a while, but then it would have blown over. But he didn't. He had taken it back too quickly, almost like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. Why? What did he know that I didn't? I didn't want to be thinking the things racing through my mind at that moment. My first instinct was to track Anna down and demand answers. But where would that get me? What would I even say? Hey, Anna, by any chance, have you been sleeping with someone else? Yeah, that would go over well. If she had been unfaithful, she would deny it. And if she hadn't, how could she ever forgive me for doubting her? Besides, if there was something to know, it would have been nearly 16 years ago. Would that even matter anymore? Or worse, was it still happening? My stomach twisted, and I felt like I might be sick. I still had no real reason to be worried, but that didn't stop my mind from spiraling. Then, a thought hit me like a bolt of lightning. I shot up from my chair and practically ran to the study. Digging through the files, I found the kids' medical records. Lisa, James, and David, all 1+. The same as me. A wave of relief crashed over me, until doubt crept back in. Blood types weren't absolute proof. If David had a completely different blood type, then yeah, that would have been clear-cut. But just because all 3 kids matched mine, that didn't necessarily mean anything. Coincidences happened. I needed something stronger. DNA. I could barely believe I was even considering it. Was I really about to take one angry outburst from my son and blow it up into a full-blown paternity test? Was I losing my mind? But then, that evening at dinner, David wouldn't meet my eyes. The entire meal, he kept his head down, barely saying a word. And when he got up from the table without so much as a glance at anyone, my stomach twisted into knots again. What's up with David? Anna asked, clearly noticing his odd behavior too. No idea, I said, trying to sound casual. I turned to the other 2 kids. Either of you know what's going on? They both shook their heads, looking clueless. Has he seemed upset about anything lately? I pressed, hoping for some insight. Again, just blank expressions and shrugs. Once they left the table, I knew I had to say something to Anna. David's always been different from the other 2. I started carefully. You ever wonder why? Anna let out an exasperated sigh. Babe, let's not start this again, she said, standing up to clear the plates. He's not that different. He's just more serious, more thoughtful than the other 2. That's all. And just like that, the conversation was over. Was that deliberate? Or was she really as unconcerned as she seemed? I couldn't tell. That night, as soon as everyone was asleep, I sat down at my computer and started researching DNA testing. By the time I finally stepped away from the screen, my head was spinning with information, but I still wasn't sure what to do. The next morning at work, I spent an hour tracking down a lab that performed paternity tests. My secretary could have done it in 5 minutes, but what was I supposed to tell her? Hey, can you find me a place to secretly test my kid's DNA? Yeah, not happening. The lab could do it, no problem. But it wasn't cheap, especially if I wanted results fast. And I did. I needed to know before I let doubt tear my marriage apart. When I mentioned I had 3 kids, they suggested I send samples for all of them, along with my own, for comparison. Have you ever tried secretly collecting a hair sample from your own kids? Let me tell you, it's not easy, especially when David was actively avoiding me. But somehow, I pulled it off and sent the samples in. Now all I had to do was wait. That next week was hell. David seemed to settle down, probably relieved that I hadn't confronted him. There were even moments when I almost convinced myself I was being ridiculous, when I nearly pulled him aside and gently asked what he had meant that day. But I waited. I needed the results first. Anna, meanwhile, carried on as if nothing was wrong. She was the same loving wife she had always been, and our daily routine didn't change. I still couldn't look at her the same way, though. I tried, but every time I touched her, my mind screamed, "Who else has touched her?" We had dinner with Mike and Olivia one night, and at one point, when Mike and I were alone, I almost told him what was on my mind. Almost. But something stopped me. Maybe it was because I knew he'd be there for me if the results turned out badly. Or maybe it was because, deep down, I already suspected something that I wasn't ready to say out loud. Anna asked me a couple of times if I was okay. "I'm fine," I told her. "Just got a few things on my mind." She gave me a concerned look, but didn't push further. Then the results arrived. I had them sent to my office. No way was I letting Anna get to them first. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, scanning the document, trying to make sense of the words in front of me. David's DNA was a near-perfect match to mine. Relief flooded my body, and I felt tears prick my eyes. I had been torturing myself for no reason. Thank God I hadn't said anything to Anna. I was about to toss the letter aside when I noticed something I had overlooked. A request to call the lab. Figuring they just wanted to upsell me on something, I dialed the number. "Mr. Walker?" a professional voice answered. "This is Dr. Hoskins. Have you had a chance to review your results?" "Yes," I said, feeling confident. Seems like my worries were for nothing. "Well," he hesitated, "it's not quite that simple." A cold chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "Your son David is, without a doubt, your biological child," he reassured me. "There's less than 1,000,000 to 1 chance that he isn't." A wave of relief. But then he added, "It's your other 2 children, Mr. Walker." My blood ran cold. "What about them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's something unusual. Based on our findings, Lisa and James are only half-siblings to David." "Half-siblings? What the hell does that mean?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "It means, Mr. Walker," the doctor said gently, "that it is extremely unlikely that you are their biological father." The phone slipped from my grasp. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor, co-workers crowding around me, someone shouting to give me air. The rest of the day was a blur. I went home in a daze, grateful the house was empty. But I couldn't sit still. I had to hear it again. Had to be sure. I called the lab back. "No mistake?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "With only 1 sample, we might have requested another for confirmation," the doctor explained. "But with 2, I'm afraid it's almost certain." And then he asked me a question that made my blood run ice cold. "Mr. Walker, do you have a brother?" I barely heard his next words. "Because, statistically speaking, your children's biological father is likely related to you." Mike, my own brother. And just like that, my perfect little world came crashing down. I decided to talk to David. "I might know more than you think, son," I said, forcing a smile that I didn't really feel. David's eyes locked onto mine. "Then why don't you do something about it, Dad?" he muttered bitterly. "Why do you let them get away with it?" Wait, that wasn't the response I was expecting. That didn't sound like we were talking about the same thing at all. "Get away with what, son?" I asked cautiously. What the hell was going on? David gave me a long, searching look, as if trying to decide whether or not I truly didn't know. Then, in barely more than a whisper, he said, "Uncle Tom, Dad." I felt my stomach drop. Tom, not Mike. Tom was Anna's sister's husband, the youngest of the 4 sisters, and by far the most attractive of the bunch. "When you're at work, once a month or so," David continued, his voice tight with embarrassment, It's so damn humiliating. My head spun. I could barely process what I was hearing. They've been at it for years, Dad, he added, his voice cracking. Lisa says she thinks I'm Tom's son, not yours. David's face crumpled, and suddenly, he was crying. Without thinking, I pulled him into my arms. It had been years since I'd done that, and I was startled by how strong my little boy had become. I promise you, David, I murmured, holding him tightly. You are my son, not Tom's. How do you know? He sobbed into my shoulder. How can you be sure? I just do, son, I told him with certainty. Believe me, I know. We sat there for a long time, talking, well, mostly me reassuring him, without revealing too much. Eventually, I convinced him that he was my son, and I watched the weight of that knowledge lift off his shoulders. But there was something else. Lisa and James knew. They had known about Anna's affair with Tom for a long time, but not knowing what to do, they had simply turned a blind eye. What an awful position to put your own children in. A few days later, I did the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. I took all 3 kids out for lunch, and I told them everything. The whole damn truth. I had no idea how they would react, but considering the circumstances, they took it well. Lisa cried, her shoulders shaking as she covered her face with her hands. James sat in stunned silence, his head in his hands. David just clenched his jaw, his expression unreadable. All 3 of them wanted to confront Anna immediately, but I managed to talk them out of it. There are things I need to take care of first, I told them. They swore their love and loyalty to me that day. They weren't far from outright saying they never wanted to see their mother again. I talked them out of that, too. Whatever she's done, she's still your mother, I reminded them. She's loved and cared for you your whole lives. That hasn't changed. Even as I said the words, they felt hollow, especially after what they told me. Anna's affair with Tom had been going on for years. Maybe not long enough for him to be David's father, but long enough. And as for the once-a-month thing, it could have been an exaggeration, but none of us really knew for sure. At the end of the evening, we sat together in silence, the weight of it all pressing down on us. And then, one by one, we broke. Lisa, James, David, and finally, me. We all cried. We cried for the lie we had lived, for the betrayal, for the destruction of the family we had all thought was real. But me? I needed something else. I needed revenge. I thought long and hard about how to handle it. But in the end, I couldn't come up with any elaborate plan for revenge that wouldn't destroy my kids in the process. So it had to be simple. A direct confrontation. And I knew exactly when to do it. The night of our 20th anniversary. The family gathered, as families do. My parents had passed by then. Mike and I were both born late in their lives, but everyone else was there. 39 people. Mostly Anna's side of the family, plus a few close friends. The dinner was good, or so they told me. As for me, I could have been eating cardboard and drinking dishwater for all I noticed. Then, it was time for speeches. Here we go. The end. Or maybe, the beginning. My heart pounded in my chest, my palms slick with sweat. I stood, raising my glass. Welcome, everyone, I began, my voice even. It means so much to have all our family and friends here tonight. I talked for a bit, just some meaningless small talk, letting them get comfortable, letting Anna think she was safe. Then, I got to it. And now, to celebrate 20 years of marriage to my dear wife, Anna. There was light laughter, a few teasing comments about our love life. Anna blushed, smiling at the jokes. They all thought I was kidding. They had no idea how wrong they were. Then, the first domino fell. Lisa pushed her chair back and silently left the room. Then James. Then David. One by one, they stood and walked out. No words. No glances. Just silence. Every pair of eyes at the table followed them in confusion. Come back here, you 3. Anna snapped, shooting to her feet. Don't be so rude to your father. Only James hesitated. He turned back just long enough to shake his head at her. Disgusted, disappointed. Before following his siblings out. Babe. Anna turned to me, her voice sharp with frustration. Do something. Tell them to come back. I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. It's okay, honey, I said calmly. They already know what I'm about to say. And since this concerns them, maybe it's best if they weren't here. Her mouth fell open. For a moment, pure shock flashed across her face. Then, slowly, realization crept in. I watched as her mind worked through all the possible reasons for my words. I saw the fear settle in her eyes. "Sit down, Anna," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. She hesitated. Then, almost mechanically, she lowered herself into her chair. I took a deep breath. "I've had 20 wonderful years of marriage," I continued, my voice strong. "The perfect marriage. Or so I thought." Silence. Absolute silence. People shifted uncomfortably. Some looked puzzled. Others, ones I hadn't expected, looked nervous. "Imagine my surprise," I said, pausing for effect, "when I recently discovered that Lisa, my beloved Lisa, is not actually my daughter." Anna let out a strangled sob, her hands flying to her face. The only sound in the room. "Would you care to tell everyone who Lisa's real father is, Anna?" I asked. Nothing. Only the sound of her quiet, shuddering cries. "Okay then," I continued, my voice dangerously calm. "Would anyone else care to tell me who's been sleeping with my wife behind my back?" Nothing. Then, a sudden movement. A chair scraping against the floor. And to my shock, it wasn't Mike. It was Olivia, Mike's wife. "It's not what you think," she cried. "It wasn't some sordid affair or anything. It was just a few times. Just to help Anna get pregnant." The words slammed into me like a freight train. "The family needed a boy," she continued, pleading, "especially Mother. And it didn't look like you were capable." The room spun. My wife, my brother, and now my sister-in-law. They had all known, and I had been the fool. I looked around the table and saw it, clear as day. The split. On one side, the friends. Those who had no idea, shifting uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at one another, unsure of what was happening. One by one, they stood up, mumbled excuses, and left, too embarrassed to stay. On the other side, the family. The ones who knew. As I scanned their faces, realization sank in deeper. They all knew. One of Anna's other sisters stood up and clapped her hands. "Okay, kids, go play in the other room," she instructed. One by one, the younger children were shuffled out. The teenagers were encouraged to leave, too, but this was better than any soap opera they'd ever seen. EastEnders, Days of Our Lives, whatever. The real-life drama unfolding in front of them was too good to miss. None of them budged. "Fair enough," I muttered, scanning the faces of the adults. "You all knew, didn't you?" Silence. A couple of the husbands looked confused. Maybe they really didn't know. But everyone else avoided my gaze. Mike finally spoke up. "Look, bro, it's not what it looks like." But the look of sheer hatred I shot him made him shut his mouth immediately. "So you all knew," I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. "You all knew that my own brother slept with my wife and fathered Lisa?" No one answered. No one denied it either. "It was only 3 times, Olivia blurted out desperately. "Just enough to get her pregnant." I snapped my head toward her. "And whose brilliant idea was that?" I demanded, my temper boiling over. Too many glances shot toward Anna's mother. I let out a bitter laugh. "Should have known." I shook my head. "Thanks, Mom," I spat sarcastically, looking straight at my mother-in-law. "Your desperation for a grandson just cost me my marriage." "No," Anna suddenly cried out, finally breaking her silence. She clutched my arm. "Please, my love, don't say that. You can't mean it. I love you. I couldn't live without you." I turned to face her, my voice low and cold. "Just one mistake, huh?" She nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, it was just that one time. It seemed like the right thing to do back then. Mom planned it all out?" "Oh yeah." I interrupted, my fury spiking. "Then who the hell fathered James?" Anna's face went pale. "What do you mean?" she whispered. I said slowly, that I got DNA tests done. And guess what? The same man who fathered Lisa fathered James too. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Everything stopped. Olivia's head snapped toward me. "What?" she gasped, genuine shock in her voice. James too. I nodded grimly. You heard me. I turned toward my brother. If you are Lisa's father, then you're James's father too. The silence was deafening. And then, you bastard! Olivia shrieked. She whirled toward Mike, her face twisted with rage. You promised me. You swore it was only for Anna. You swore it was only 3 times, just to get her pregnant. Mike looked down at the table, not even attempting to deny it. Olivia turned her fury toward Anna. And you. I agreed to lend you my husband for 1 damn week, and you just continue with him? She took 3 quick steps toward Anna and slapped her across the face. The crack echoed in the silent room. Anna reeled back, clutching her cheek, but Olivia wasn't done. You whore. You lying, cheating, backstabbing cow, she screamed, striking her again. It took 2 of the other sisters to pull Olivia off of Anna, but she was sobbing by then, too exhausted to keep fighting. I turned back to Anna Mom, my voice dripping with venom. Happy now? She just stared blankly ahead, emotionless. That's when I turned to Tom. Well? I demanded. Anyone else been screwing my wife behind my back? Tom visibly tensed. And suddenly, you son of a bitch. Tom's own wife screamed at him, standing up so fast her chair toppled over. Her eyes were wild with rage. It's true, isn't it? What they told me that night. You did sleep with Anna at that party. Tom's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to deny it, but he wasn't fast enough. Her fist slammed into his nose. He yelped, stumbling back, blood dripping down his face. Don't bother coming home tonight, she spat. In fact, don't ever come home again. Olivia wiped her tear-streaked face and turned to Mike. That goes for you too, she hissed. I'm divorcing you, and I never want to see you again. With that, Terry's sister linked arms and stormed out of the room. You're no sister of ours, they called back to Anna. She just sat there, sobbing into her hands. The family was shattered. That night, Anna never came home. In fact, except for coming to collect a few belongings, she never set foot in our house again. The kids refused to talk to her for a long time. Even when they finally let her back into their lives, it was never the same. I was still dad, but she became more like a distant aunt. Someone they knew they were supposed to care about, but couldn't fully trust. The entire family fractured. Olivia divorced Mike, as promised. Another left Tom. Then, 2 nights later, Olivia showed up at my house. The kids weren't home. She made it clear why she was there. I don't know if it was revenge for her, or just some form of closure, but we were like rabbits for hours. No love, no tenderness, just raw, angry fun. And then she left. I found out later she didn't stop with just me. One by one, she worked her way through all of Mark's friends. Did their marriage survive? No idea. And honestly, I didn't care. Not my problem. 3 weeks later, the Predist sister called me. She invited me to dinner. I went. We ate. We talked. We kissed. And eventually, we ended up in bed. But this time, it was different. For the first time in years, it felt real. Like I was back to my old self. Like I could breathe again. And I think, maybe, she felt the same way. As for my former mother-in-law, her long-suffering husband finally had enough. He packed up, bought a yacht, and spent the rest of his life sailing around Europe. Sometimes, the kids and I would join him for a few weeks, cruising the south of France, the Canary Islands, all over. Lisa met a young Spanish man while traveling. They fell in love, and she ended up marrying into a family that owned the biggest yacht marina in Europe. That came in handy. James and David? They're still playing the field, probably warned off of marrying too young, thanks to my disaster of a life. And Anna? I don't see her anymore. The kids say she asks about me. I just grunt. And me? I'm thinking of trying marriage again. I think we love each other, but we're still a little wary. We'll see. But damn, wouldn't I love to see Sarah's face if we did?